I'm Laura.
And we are two best friends who usually do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. But today is a special
We are
episode.
volunteering as tribute.
We are volunteering as tribute to talk about a book that no one has had any takes on
No,
whatsoever. Um,
absolutely.
and we are talking about Suzanne Collins' works with a focus on Sunrise on the Reaping. Because
Yes.
Hannah dove into a Hunger Games lore last year, and
hmm
then she just pulled Laura right into it. So
You were talking about it so much that I was just like, would I enjoy these? Like, I was kind of just like not going to get on board and read them. And then you were talking about it, and I had a little bit of FOMO and was just kind of like, I think I might like them. Would I like them, Hannah? And you were like, I think you should.
I think you should. And guess what? I think you liked them.
I did like them. I
Uh,
did.
yeah. Laura, what's your original history with the Hunger Games?
So I originally read them as, I believe, a freshman in college,
Mm-hmm.
the
Around that time.
trilogy. I think I was a freshman in college because I didn't read a lot of books when I was in college, but I specifically remember reading this trilogy in college. And the movies came out when we were in college,
Yeah.
and it was like a huge phenomenon. This is also when Jennifer Lawrence blew up and everything.
Yes.
Not literally blew up, but like her career in a good way.
Yes.
And I remember there just being like so much talk surrounding the Hunger Games and everything. It was just huge. And that's when it really took off. And I think that our generation specifically was one that they were always trying to chase like the next phenomenon, the next Harry Potter, the next
Mhm.
Twilight, to figure out what was going to be the big movie sensation that people were going to glom onto and have like the huge premieres and all the extra
Oh,
movies, the parts one and two, and all this. And Hunger Games definitely was that. And I think it was so interesting the way that it has kind of like the series itself has kind of affected culture and everything too, because it even inspired like a lot of young women to pick up archery and things like that. So I think it's just been a very interesting series, and I think Suzanne Collins had started something really unique there and brings a really unique perspective to YA dystopian fantasy. Hannah, what about you?
I believe I read these in high school going into college. I was someone who tried to chase the next best thing, so huge into Harry Potter, huge into Twilight in a fake way. I think I've gone on the record that I don't think I actually
Yeah.
liked those
We've
books.
heard about your Twilight journey.
Yeah, so like I don't need to go into a deep dive, but I do remember specifically loving the Hunger Games and loving Catching Fire. And then I
Catching
think
Fire
it
was also my favorite too, and I adore the movie still to this day. I think it's likely the best movie adaptation from a book that I've maybe ever seen.
and so I loved Catching Fire. And then I remember I think I was in college when Mockingjay came
hmm
out, and so I read it in college and I was an English major. And I remember being like heavily disappointed because I think it was my first experience with what I felt was a very big rush job on the final book, where it was like, oh, the
hmm
momentum is here. The books that are about to be turned into movies. You got to get the third book out.
Yep.
And I specifically remember when, oh my gosh, what's his name? The pretty man in the book series, when he,
Gail.
no, not Gale, um, the guy who with the trident, what's his
Oh,
name?
Finnick Odair.
Finnick. Yes. I remember when Finnick died, it was kind of a blink and you'll miss it. And I didn't even realize he had died. Like, that's how
hmm
fast I was reading
Also,
through
full
it. That was,
spoilers for all of the Hunger
oh,
Games books.
yeah, so sorry. We're they've been out for a million years, except for Sunrise on the Reaping. So if you're here, hopefully you've read them all. Um, but like when Finnick died, I I didn't realize he had because it happens in like a quick
Mhm.
paragraph. And like it was one of those things where I was like, well, he's such a major character. This is so fast. And I don't think I appreciated the books until I reread them as an adult, like this past
Mhm.
year, where I wasn't a huge reality TV person, and I don't think I like interacted with it enough to understand some of the themes that Suzanne Collins had going on when I was 18 years old.
Mhm.
And like I feel like they've become more prescient as time has gone on and as we've
Yeah.
become much more, addicted to screens and addicted to like influencers. Like all of the themes that she has back then are so prescient that like it made me
Yeah.
appreciate everything so much more. Um
It's amazing how she was able to like call out some of these things. Like I'm I've read so much dystopian recently, even that it's shocking to me how people are able to write these stories and then they come true. I'm
Yep.
like, how do you know? I can't even predict what the weather is going to be like tomorrow
I know, it's so
using
wild.
apps.
So using apps. So yeah, I was definitely an original reader, but I actually have never seen Hunger Game Part 1 or 2 in the movie. So shocking, I
Mockingjay.
know.
Mockingjay
Mockingjay.
part.
Yes, sorry.
Yes.
Um, I've seen the original two movies. I remember it was also during the college phase of English major. Like,
Mhm.
it's not as good as the books, but so I'd have to rewatch them as an adult, and I haven't gone that far in yet.
I
Uh,
specifically remember going to the theater near our college to see all the movies, and
oh,
I loved them. They
oh,
were
good.
so good.
I was a little bit. I remember loving the first one, and then I don't think I loved the second one as much. But like now,
The
thinking back
Mockingjay
to
ones
it,
were the weakest, in my opinion, and
okay,
Catching Fire was extremely strong. So it was a unique way to do movies, but I do think it was a rush situation because there was so much with this fandom and everything, and it was
oh yeah,
just so huge that they really needed her to get the work done. They really wanted the movies, so it
that's where
is
we
what it
were.
is.
But
Hmm.
I do really appreciate the two new installments in recent years. I think like
Yes.
these are so rich and well done, and she has such specific takes. I think like the meme is like Suzanne Collins was sitting there like thinking through these deep thematic tomes when J.K. Rowling
Hmm.
was like, "Did you know Dumbledore was gay?" Like that's kind of
Did you know they disappeared their poop? Like,
yes, exactly. And it's like, well,
like no one
Twitter
cares
is
about
not
that.
good for everyone. Like, um, so I do think these new installments have been so important because
Mhm.
minus the Santino Fontana
You
dialogue.
know what? After listening to both of the new prequels, I listened to the second one and I don't. Jefferson White, I think, is the narrator of the second
Yes.
prequel, Sunrise on the Reaping. I don't think that Santino did that horrible of a job, but I really wish he would have sang the
Yes.
songs instead of just speaking them. Like, no, like,
Yeah.
don't Charlie Daniels this. You can't. You have to actually sing it.
Yeah. I think that was the part that really took me out. I don't think I would have
Hmm.
minded him as much
And
if
he does
he
have a
had.
perfect villain voice. We know this from
Yes.
Frozen. So
Yes.
he
And
does
it
do a
did.
really good job making you feel like this is a sinister character, but also kind of endear you to them a little bit.
Yes. I think that that's
So,
because he has like a very bright tone, but you could feel his
yes.
villainy underlying it. And so that's
Hmm.
super helpful with a character like Corio, as he is
Hmm.
referred to in the novels, who like President Snow, even as a child, I think Suzanne Collins does a really effective job of showing like you can like bad people can suffer and it doesn't mean
Sure.
that what they did isn't bad. It means that
Right.
there's context for some of the pain they cause, but not to the extent
Hmm.
of what some people read into their thirst trapping for
Yeah.
Corio and their belief
We
that if
we
he
talked
just
about this
loved
briefly and
Lucy, like
we talked about this briefly in other episodes when I had just finished the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, but I was a little confused that some people were very much like making Coriolanus their new book boyfriend, and
yeah.
I didn't like that very much. I very much hated that character, but I think Suzanne Collins wanted to kind of show, like you were saying, the complexities that go into the ways that people become the villains. And I think she did a really effective job of doing that. I
Yeah.
think when they did the movie, though, they wanted to make it explicitly clear that we are not to like him. So there was a definite, my husband and I just watched the movie recently, and there was a definite point in the movie where they're like, we will make this man look like a Nazi. And they shaved his golden curls, and he,
He just walks on the screen and you're like, and Lucy's like, I still might have a boyfriend. And you're like, girl, that's a Nazi.
we're
Like,
like, no, he's definitely a Nazi now.
yeah,
And
he's,
that
yeah.
actor had a very unique ability to have this like look in his eyes where you were like unsure whether he was going to do something dangerous in 2 seconds. And
Yes.
I was afraid.
I heavily agree. He did a really good job of acting. I thought that movie was
Yes.
very well cast. Like they did a
It was
lot.
perfectly cast, actually. And the
Yeah.
guy who played Lucky Flickerman was amazing.
Yes, he was so good. Way to have like a perfect casting because that
Hmm.
is Jason Schwartzman.
Yes.
Um, he's a great actor, and I feel like he
Hmm.
did a perfect job as Lucky Flickerman. Like he kind of just shows some of the callousness, but like trying to be like light and happy and
And also
Violet.
kind of looks like the Tooch.
Oh
So
yeah. Oh, he looks like the Tooch. Those two were
they're related.
yeah. And I think like Peter Dinklage did a good job, Viola
Oh, I
Davis did
love
a good
Peter
job.
Dinklage.
Like both of them were excellently cast.
Mhm.
And I really
Viola
liked,
Davis was terrifying, actually. I wasn't sure how I would feel about her being in that role, but she is such a fantastic actress. And
just the way they even like styled her stuff to make it look like blood
mhm.
and like it was so effectively done. And I
You know
really
how
love,
Timothy Chalamet did that speech about how he's like seeking greatness,
yes.
and he mentioned specifically Viola Davis. So I was listening to Amy Poehler's podcast because I like to support new startups, and she was she was talking to Quinta Brunson, and Amy Poehler's like oddly obsessed with Timothy Chalamet's speech on seeking greatness. Like she's brought it up so many times in this podcast, which is hilarious to me. But she was talking to Quinta about this, and Quinta was like, I don't know if he's just mentioned Viola off the cuff or if that was something that was pre-planned, but I think it was brilliant. And I agree because she is such a fantastic actress and so like I don't know, she's able to do such diverse roles. I think that she's just fantastic and I didn't know what to expect from her out of this role because in the book I was like, "Oh, I really just don't know if this is the right part for her." She did great.
I agree. And I really loved in the book series, like obviously we're going to turn to Sunrise on the Reaping, but we're talking broadly because it's the
Hmm.
works of Suzanne Collins. But I thought the development of the Hunger Games is like a cruel joke that like one
Hmm.
man is tortured by for the rest of his life. And like it's one of the first times in a book where he's like, I hate you because of who your father was. And it's like, it seems like he might be right. Like, it
Yeah.
seems like Corio holds a lot of the preconceptions that his dad does. And this is just a man who sees that for what it is and calls it out. And it's
Mm.
interesting to
Peter
have,
Dinklage, you mean?
yeah, Peter Dinklage's character. Because you find out in the
Hmm.
Ballad of Songbirds and
Dean
Snakes that
Highbottom.
he was drunk. He was talking to Corio's dad, and he developed these Hunger Games. And Corio's dad stole the idea from him and turned it in as a class project to Viola Davis's character. And
Mhm.
that is
Dr.
how,
Gall.
and that was how the Hunger Games was created. And Highbottom like spends the rest of his life like addicted to drugs and trying to forget like the cruelty of all of
Mhm.
this. Um, and it's just it's so well done. Like
It's very well done, and I, I, I really think that it was so well acted too. Because even at the end, when we have the kind of come the prodigal son moment where
yeah.
Corio comes home to Dr. Gall, his
Oh
new
dear.
mentor,
Yep.
and now has that dangerous look in his eyes all the time, and he's very much ready to punish the people of the districts, where before I think he was less likely to just full out go punishment mode. I don't know if that makes sense where I'm
No,
getting with this.
but I also think that that comes from like a place of privilege because before he
Hmm.
was just struggling to survive. And when you're struggling to
Yes.
survive, your focus is on so many other things. And I think that that's kind of the underlying issue that came up a lot with Coriolanus in that book was because he was fighting for survival, he didn't get to have some of the prejudices that he obviously had throughout the book shine
Hmm.
through. And the times that those shine through were like when he seemed to have ownership over Lucy Gray. Like
Yep.
he had a specific type of I own you because I'm helping you through this and you
Hmm.
now owe me something.
I
And
do feel like
his
that's where the movie struggled a little bit. The movie was good, very good.
yes.
It was a good adaptation. I think Suzanne Collins has gotten very lucky with her movie adaptations because
Yes.
they've done a very good job of being loyal to the work that she has written. I don't know how involved she is with the movies or what have you, but she might be very involved if this is
Yeah, I don't
how
know.
good they are. I'm not sure. But the one thing that I noticed that stood out to me a little bit was there was less of that feel of him like being possessive over Lucy Gray in the movie, and it
Yeah.
was much more subtle than it was in the books.
Yeah, I think it's always hard because, like, if you're doing like a POV, like he almost
Yes.
has to be talking to someone to
Hmm.
facilitate that, and
Hmm.
like you can't do that without like because who's he going to talk to? Sejanus, who's supposed to like him. It's
Exactly.
like you
We
can't
can't do
get
it like a snapped episode.
right.
So,
So I think that that book was so effective as showing some of
mhm.
his underlying hatred towards everyone, like his dialogue with Sejanus, like Sejanus's
Hmm.
belief that they were friends, and the fact that like he profited off the death of a boy he turned in. um and I think it comes from his lack of privilege at the beginning to his privilege at the end that really shines
Yeah, the
through.
whole situation with Sejanus and everything is unique too. I thought that that was a great add-in character, even though it only was a character just to kind of further the plot, really. I
Yeah.
think that Sejanus was really a good way to show more of the complexities of feelings within the
Yes.
capital, even, and how complicated Snow's situation is to get to the top.
When it goes to like you and I talk about this a lot, but privilege that shuts the door behind it, where it's like,
Hmm.
oh, I've made it through this door, so I'm gonna shut it. Like Sejanus was someone who really struggled, where he knew he was someone
Yes.
who could have potentially died had his father not gotten lucky, has his father not been like a war
Hmm.
profiteer in some sense of the word. And he's
And
similar
then
to
to
like
mentor his classmates in the
and like
Hunger Games, like, oh,
and have them hate him, and he knows why they hate him, and he does want to die, and he wants his death to mean something because it could
hmm.
potentially mean something in a way that it wouldn't for others. Like I think his character shows a lot of the like the best of intentions people who don't know what to do and don't know how
And
to
also
put
some of
it
the
in power.
naivety of
Right.
his privilege too, where he tries to help people when he's a peacekeeper in 12, and it severely backfires on him
Yeah.
to the point that it ends up costing him his life, unfortunately, because Snow needs to cover everything up. And
Which I think is a good reflection over all of these books because I think what the prequels highlight to me, both Sunrise on the Reaping and Ballad of Songbirds and Stakes, is the fact that like Suzanne Collins knows that Katniss is important because she's a good catalyst, but she also knows that other people could have potentially had a revolution
mhm,
happen if the timing was right. And what
mhm,
we learn in these book series is like, okay, the timing wasn't right because like these things, the infrastructure wasn't there because like they were still building up power because the people who needed to get where they needed to get weren't there yet. And I think that's a really effective thing to say of like, Sejanus could have been powerful had it been the right time.
mhm.
Like, and sometimes heroes aren't going to prosper because they just don't have everything aligned for them. And
I
like,
think also, like, piggybacking off of what you're saying, Suzanne Collins does a really great job showing that revolutions aren't won individually, and
yes.
our revolutions aren't fought individually,
Yeah.
that it's a group effort. And I think that that is very much evident in all of her books as well, that community is what
Hmm.
wins fights.
Well, and that's even pointed out to Katniss over and over again. Of like, you are the person who gets the community fighting, but you are not the community who's fighting. Like,
Yes,
your role is really to be kind of just
a
on a TV
figurehead.
screen. Like, you're a figurehead and you're not actually useful. You're not actually a leader.
Hmm.
And that's why it's helpful because people see authenticity in you, but it makes you so you're not actually very helpful in the war
Hmm.
effort. Like, um, so I do think that that's such an effective thematic like rolled
Yes,
over the course of all of these books. So, um,
absolutely.
but turning to Sunrise on the Reaping, we haven't really talked about this book on the podcast yet.
No, not
Um,
yet.
so do you remember so this book, sorry to back it up. This book follows Haymitch through his uh
Haymitch, who was the previous winner of the Hunger Games in District 12 and
mhm,
is the mentor of Katniss and Peeta when they compete in their Hunger Games and in
yes,
their Quarter Quell the following year. And Haymitch was the winner of the Quarter Quell
50th
previously.
quarter
and
quell or the second quarter quell.
the
Sorry.
second quarter quell, I believe, right? Or maybe
Yeah,
this was the
50th.
first.
It's the 50th annual Hunger Games, the second quarter quell.
Okay, yes, yes, yes. And yeah, and that's kind of all we know about him in the Hunger Games
Hmm.
trilogy, really, is that he was the winner of the first or the second quarter quell.
Well, and in the third book, they watch Haymitch's tapes. Like they do it in secret because Haymitch
Hmm.
is a drunkard in the books. He is like heavily
Hmm.
dependent on drinking. He can't really be sober. And they watch his Hunger Games and they see that he kind of quote unquote kept to himself.
Hmm.
That he didn't really do anything until he meets up with one of the other District 12 people and he hangs out with her for a while and then she ends up dying and he runs to her and he like comforts her but then leaves her and that's really all that they saw and they also saw that he was the one who figured out that the games has an edge to it and he like
Hmm.
threw the rocks down, saw them bounce back up, and that is how he killed the final person was the axe fell over and then came back and that's all
Hmm.
they see. um, which is what happens at the end of this book is his
Yes,
entire Hunger Games is rewritten, and that is what is shown. So Suzanne Collins did, I didn't
she
know
did a
how,
really great job.
yeah, I didn't know how I felt about it when I first read it, but as it's grown on me as time has gone on, where I'm like, no, that's actually really effective because her whole
This book.
theme. Yes, I wasn't sure about how I felt about like the rewriting of history and things like that because I was like, oh, like we already know what happened to Haymitch. How is she going to fix this?
It wasn't really a rewriting of history because she kept it extremely the same.
Right, where it was just, but she also said like, well, it's propaganda. So like
Yep.
this book is very much her propaganda book. And she's gone on the record
Hmm.
of that, of like history is what is told by the people
Yes,
who are telling the story.
the people
And
in
so
charge. Hmm.
it doesn't mean that that's exactly what happened because in this book we find out that there's so much depth to why Hamish decided what he decided and that he was friends with a lot of these people, that he had very good
Hmm.
connections, but because of who he was, he was kind of he was forced into like forced to be ostracized, and forced to kind of go it alone as much as he could, because of all the events that take place in the book. So it was very
How
effective.
did you
But that
feel
is,
about like his entry into the Hunger Games?
yeah. So in this book, he enters into the Hunger Games because someone else dies. They didn't
Hmm.
want to do it, and so
There's actually like a an uprising at
yeah.
the reaping,
Hmm.
which ends up causing the person who was chosen to die.
Yes.
And Haymitch is just kind of standing there, and they're like,
Because
"You,
he was there
you're in."
for Lenore and
Mhm.
Lenore Dove, as she is called throughout this entire book,
His
which
girlfriend.
Laura and I said off mic. It's the ones like we totally get why the Covey have a very specific naming system,
Hmm.
but like when you're listening to the audiobook and it's like Lenore Dove, Lenore Dove, Lenore Dove, you're like, I
It's
do
very
know her
repetitive.
name. Like,
Like we get it.
but he was there to help Lenore because she was part of the uprising because she really believes in
Hmm.
fighting against this. And so they just pick him and they retape everything to make it look like he was the
Yep.
chosen one. And he was never supposed to be in the game. It's pretty devastating when you know, like, his
Yep.
history that he's going to win, that, like, he's going to make it through and have to go through all of this stuff. And, like, it's so effective to show that these games have always been false. And, like,
Yep.
yes, we come to it 24 years later in the next books, but, like, it's just because they became more effective at keeping people held down because even at the
Hmm.
50th year, it's still kind of messy. Like there's still kind of
Yeah.
something percolating underneath. And that's very interesting to read about. And Suzanne Collins really hit it out of the park with that, I think.
Yeah. I do want to just briefly go back to what you said that it's kind of tragic to read this knowing what happens to Haymitch
Yeah.
because I thought that a lot when I was reading this, where I was like, "Ugh." I didn't have the same feeling when I was reading the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, where I was like, oh, this really sucks to know that he becomes the president of Pan Am. Like, no, I did not
You're
care
just
about
kind of like,
that
oh,
at
he's
all. I
going to
was like,
become the president.
this guy sucks.
Yeah.
But he's always sucked. But reading Sunrise on the Reaping and knowing how Haymitch is in the Hunger Games trilogy, it's very much like kind of a heavy like punch in your gut knowing that this is the backstory. And I wasn't sure how I would feel about Haymitch's story, like knowing. before I even read the book, knowing that this was going to be a prequel about Haymitch, I was kind of like, oh, come on, do we need to know?
Yeah. I kind
And
of was like, we
I,
had his story in that video. And then Suzanne is like, no, we didn't.
she was right. She
Yeah.
was right, and we trust her implicitly now because she did such a wonderful job, just I guess punching us in the gut and showing us how awful his story actually was.
Yeah. And it is just, it's so tragic because you watch him and we kind of knew from the books that believes he sees a lot of himself in her.
Hmm.
But reading this, it's like, oh no, they are such similar people because they're very
Yes.
often like wrong place, wrong time. They actually just want to keep their head down and live their
Hmm.
life. They don't want to be a part of all of this until the world happens to them and it wakes them up and they're like, oh, I actually need to do this. Like, Haymitch is trying to make it work for his mother and his little brother.
Hmm.
He wants them to have enough money. His mom is like a laundress and
Hmm.
he's just working a ton and he just wants to get married to his girl. I think it's
Yep.
really all he wants. And he is with someone who also wants to fight and do uprisings and make sure that they're like working
Hmm.
towards something better. And, Katniss does not end up with Gale, but like that is where she starts out with someone who's a lot more
Yeah,
angry and a lot more defiant. And so like their parallels are so specific that I do think that there's an emotional tie even through that because I think Haymitch is not the easiest character to like in the book series, but like we do
sure.
see a lot of the underlying catness of him and why he probably felt some kind of connection to her.
I do think it's a unique thing to mention that he wanted to be the worst winner of the Hunger Games and that he was going to purposely cause problems. He knew
Yeah.
if he won that he was going to be a bad winner. He was not going to be someone that they would be proud to tote around and show off, that he was going to cause problems. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of his alcoholism and drug use and everything is clear defiance and depression like
Yeah.
over his situation and feeling helpless and hopeless a lot of the time, but also is a form of rebellion in itself to not be this perfect poster child of I won the Hunger Games and I'm so grateful now that I have this fancy house. And his acts are very much defiant even in the tragedy of it all.
Yeah. And he's defiant in the only way he knows how to be. Like he
And the
knows
only way
he's
he
not going
can
to.
be,
Yeah,
honestly.
because so much has happened to him because like even
They
in his Hunger
they take
Games,
everything from him.
like he has this girl who said she was his quote unquote like first sweetheart or something,
Hmm.
named
Hmm.
Luella. They're like so close and you find
Well,
out
they
that
were
like
both reaped together,
yes.
and she's a little girl. So this in this quarter quell, they reap double the
Yes.
amount of children to show the cost of the war on the citizens of the district. That there were twice as many citizens of the district lost, and so it's all symbolic and everything. And so this was a very symbolic quarter quell, and Luella was one of the other tributes who was chosen at the reaping from District 12, and she's a little girl.
And she like made a joke to Haymitch that she was going to be his like first sweetheart. And she
Hmm.
ends up dying during
In
like a
the
chariot
well,
announcement like
I was assuming it was like one of their big like showcases. You know how they made uh, Peeta and Katniss ride in on the
yes.
chariots. That I was assuming it was something similar to that.
Yes, it was that. And so there's a huge upset with the horses and Luella ends up dying during that
She's
chariot
violently thrown
announcement.
from the chariot and dies.
And Hamish
And
has a moment
again,
where
they
he
edit
like
the footage so that it doesn't occur.
because he takes Luella like to President Snow's house and like lays her body outside of it. Um, and they just replace Luella with someone from District 11 who looks a lot like her
Mhm.
and is also heavily drugged. And she has an
Manipulated
ear.
in some way to have no memory of who or
Mhm.
very little memories of who she is.
And like she's also there throughout the games to spy on Haymitch because she has like an earpiece that tells them where she needs to be and what she needs to be doing.
And
Um,
if she defies it, she like gets headaches and everything. It's sad.
yeah. And so he kind of starts distancing himself from the other tributes, including Wyatt, who is a person who is heavily ostracized because his family bets on the games. And
Yes.
it's seen as like very beneath the districts to act that way.
Hmm.
And Wyatt's a character who's like, I'm really good with numbers and I'm good with odds because of how I was raised, but that doesn't mean I am who raised me. And I
Sure.
think his character is super interesting because they don't really want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but they also are learning through this that like parentage isn't enough to like ostracize someone, or you
Hmm.
can't pick who your parents are. Um, and so
I
that's
also think that the selection of the tributes and their dynamic was interesting because they aren't all just like immediately best friends.
right.
It's a situation where there is a little bit of tension even between the tributes of the same district where they kind of have a bit of an understanding of like, yeah, we probably should be allies, but at the same time, we don't really like each other. There's some local politics that have gotten involved here. We have some like family feud situations going
Hmm.
on and we feel a little uncomfortable associating with each other and they have to overcome some of that in order to move forward.
Yeah, because we have Maisley, who was the mayor's daughter,
Hmm.
and she's a twin. And this is someone who, like, Katniss wondered if her mom knew this girl when she was picked because she thinks that they're around the same age. And you find out that they are close friends.
Hmm.
And this is the one part that like dragged on me a little bit. Like everyone is interconnected in this, and like Katniss's
Yeah,
dad is
it's a lot of
Haymitch's
fan
best
service.
friend, and I'm like, I
Yeah,
didn't need to know that.
it's a
Like,
lot of fan service, which I could have lived without, where it's like, okay, how many people are actually in this district?
yeah,
Like 20. But
right. And they all hang out together and party
yeah,
on the weekends. Like
that's
that
where
one,
when he's like,
yeah.
oh yeah, Burdock is my best friend. I'm like, really? Burdock
Like no,
Everdeen is your best friend? You don't
he's
have any
not.
other friends?
Like, yeah, I did. That one was the hardest part for me. I think sometimes the fan service got a little bit like I didn't need it,
Yeah.
but this is also for children. So, like, I also
The
think like
fan service
teen,
was a lot more in this one than
yes,
in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I will say. And I do appreciate the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes had some little sprinkles of fan service,
yes,
but this one, Sunrise on the Reaping, went very hard with the fan service.
because Wyrus
Wyrus is in this one,
is
Beatty is in this one,
because
Mags.
Wyrus is the person who helps train Haymitch. Um,
She had
uh,
just previously won the Hunger Games the year before Haymitch was reaped.
And like you said, Beatty is also there, and his son was reaped as punishment because he was part of the rebellion.
Hmm.
And they're also trying to figure out a way to covertly sabotage the arena. And they bring Haymitch in, which is the other part that I didn't know if I needed or not, where I'm like, I don't need to know that all the members of District 12 who have ever been this are like, we'll help you and like try to disrupt everything. But it makes sense overall for where the story is going. Um, but Beatty and Amper recruit Haymitch, and he
Hmm.
begins like helping them all and trying to develop this plan while also trying to get a rascal persona on television to get sponsors. So he's playing a part as much as he can, but he also wants to be part of the revolution and to stop this, especially for Lenore.
Hmm.
Um, and so I feel like the actual Hunger Games themselves aren't super important other than he does like take down a section of the games. And he
I
does
actually enjoyed reading about the Hunger Games themselves. Like, we didn't get a lot of that in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And
right.
I think that after watching the movie, it did kind of clear up for me a little bit, like what the arena was like a little more, where it was very much an arena, where they've become more complex and scientific about creating their arenas, like the farther we go. And the arena that Haymitch is in is very much like this outdoor arena situation, like more similar to what Katniss and Peeta had in theirs. And I actually really did enjoy reading about that Hunger Games. So I will disagree with you a little bit on that.
I don't think I mean it as like I don't think it's not enjoyable. I just think like overall like that's part of the plot, but it's kind of just helping facilitate the plot. I think the
Sure.
biggest importance overall is the fact that like what we see from what Katniss and Peeta saw is very different when you're in the games because like Haymitch is trying to disrupt things. He actively disrupts the section of the Hunger Games area arena.
It's more just like you said to show us the reader of what actually happened and then
Mhm.
how it is twisted by the
Yes.
Capitol to
But
show its citizens.
of course, like he does lose Maisie during this. You find out that they're much closer. Like they had a hard time together, but like they do become like sort of friends through all of this, and there is
And
like a
trauma bond.
developing, yeah, of trauma bonding, and he ends up winning due to the force field, which he wasn't fully like intending to do. It kind of comes up as the
Mhm.
last moment, but it's televised like he's
He has a lot of
some
rage in the last moment where there's another person who is remaining in the games who I believe is one of the like careers.
careers. Yeah.
And he does initially have a moment like earlier where he spared this person
Yes.
and he they kind of like had a quote unquote truce, it seems. And then later on, when it's just the two of them remaining, she kills a little kid.
Yes.
And this sets Haymitch off. And this remaining tribute says that I think she says, if I'm remembering right, it's something about like wanting to be a good representation for the capital or something like that. And that is enraging to Haymitch.
Because he doesn't want to be the Capitol's puppet. Like he's
Yes.
so upset by all of this. He really, I feel like when you're reading these books as a child, there's some kind of distancing because you don't really realize life or death for children. But if when you
Yeah.
read it as an adult, it is heart-wrenching and like
Hmm.
coming to Haymitch's story and reading about like it's obviously like there's feminine and
It's
male
so hard
perspectives, but
to.
like she does such a good job of like a young teenage boy
Mhm.
suffering through all of this and not knowing what to do. And it's very
Well,
effective.
and it's so hard too for, at least for me, it was difficult to read knowing that he doesn't think that he's going to win from the beginning. He thinks
Yeah.
he's going to his death. And he's going in fairly selfless where he's trying to pick little kids that he thinks should be the winners
Yeah.
because he's like, I shouldn't win, this little kid should win, they would be a good winner, they would be a good winner, we decided you would be a good winner. And they're like, what does that mean? What's a good winner of the Hunger Games? And he's like, fair enough, what's a good
Yeah.
winner of the Hunger Games? And so it has even him like questioning his own like strategy of sorts
Yeah.
and his own emotions surrounding the games. But I think it's just tragic knowing that he has to constantly reassess and decide what he's going to do again because nothing seems to pan out the way that he thought it was going to. And he's watching the people around him die. He's making alliances that he didn't intend to make and becoming close to people and then watching them die. And then also trying to assess who he can really trust and what is actually being shared.
Yep. Um, and like it's so good that you bring that up because he is someone who has like all this internal work because begin in the beginning, Wyrus asks them and Mags is also there. I forgot about Mags.
Yeah, Mags is their other
They
um,
ask
mentor.
the tributes what they want, and Haymitch says he doesn't want his loved ones to watch him suffer, and he wants to end the Hunger Game by proving that tributes are people. And
Hmm.
that shows through where he's like, well, these young children are the proper winners because children are people and they're like innocent. So if I win, I'm just this big burly person who they're going to put what they need into, or I'm just the rascal, or I'm just this like, of course I shouldn't win. And it is interesting to see someone who like just wants to die and not make other people suffer.
Yeah.
And then through this all, he ends up suffering the most and he can't seem to die. And that it's a very hard look for someone who's so young. Um,
How did you feel about like the incorporation of Plutarch and Snow into Haymitch's story?
so again, I didn't care that much about Snow because it felt like fan service. Like I just
And
kind
it
of was,
also felt very similar to what was going on with like the Hunger Games with Katniss, where Snow
yes.
kept kind of inserting himself like, I know everything.
again, it's the worst criticism I have for this book. And for like I'm interested to see, I know the next prequel is like Effie Trinket, because we're gonna get these prequels
What?
until Susan. Yeah. But
She's
like
writing another one?
yeah, she's gonna write another one about
No
Effie
way.
Trinket. So like fine, whatever, that's an interesting one. But like all of these books have been like, do you want to know who's the most important district? 12. Do you want to know
Yeah.
who Snow is obsessed with? 12. And I
I wouldn't
so
mind one about another district tribute.
yeah, like I'm like, I would love to see what District 8 is up to. I would love to see a District 11. Like they seem interesting, you know. And so I
Yeah, give
am
us some of Finnick Dare and his girl that was tragic like that.
right. Or like even, I mean, there's so many other things to pull
Mags.
from
Give us
where
some
you can
mags.
like there are so many Hunger Games to pull from.
Hmm.
Why are the District 12s the most important?
Right.
Um, it's just like a very
Or
specific
look into
obsession
the
that I don't.
careers. That would be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, because if we had the careers, you can look at like some of the weird privileges versus like they're still going to die. Like
Hmm.
there's still weird machinations happening. So I would rather see some of those than just
I'm not as
Haymitch's book.
interested in like I might be eating my words soon because I'm sure she'll release a banger of a book and I'll
Right.
like it and it'll be about Effie Trinket. But I hope she steers a little farther out where it's
Yes.
not just this main group of people that
Right.
was really beloved from the main trilogy. Because I'm like, is this then gonna be like we have Plutarch?
Right. Because like that's the
Like,
thing
can
is like
we?
Snow is interesting because Snow is a villain. So you're watching this
Yes,
villainous story happen in front of you.
but
And
we
a
don't need
district.
like continued stories about the core group.
Right. Like I just don't need the core four going
Mhm.
on. That's a Scream reference if you know.
I don't, but
You
okay.
don't. But like it's a specific type of thing where I didn't need the Haymitch book, but I'm glad we got it
Yeah.
because I think she had really good themes in it. But I didn't really care for the Snow being like, I've been to District 12 before. But I will say Plutarch worked for me for a different reason. He's not super involved in the books,
Hmm.
and you kind of see his beginnings in a light dusting. Like you don't see a huge
And I'm
overarching
okay with that.
storyline.
I don't want a full book
Yes,
about him, but I'm
right.
okay with just getting a little
This like
sprinkle of him.
where he kind of knows that it's all bullshit and he's coming in
Hmm.
and he's still working within the system
And
and
also
he
being that person that's like, yeah, not all of us in the Capitol think it's cool to just murder a bunch of children.
while also being like, I'm trying to help you out. And Hamish is like, some people just want to die. Like, I think
Hmm.
it shows a certain paternalism that Plutarch has in the books, but in an
Hmm.
effective way with Hamish. So I think it's teaching you more about the character of Plutarch that isn't like, isn't he so interesting? And he worked so hard to be this, to save everyone. It's like, no, he's still someone who probably has a lot of flawed ideas because we saw that in the future books,
Yeah,
but like he did come from something because he was raised there. So I think his is
right.
interesting enough because it's a sprinkle and he's not this perfect, like, do you want to know who was perfect? Katniss Everdeen's dad. Like it's not the same. Um he finally gave up on me when I threw rocks at his fiance. Like that's it, it's just like it works better to have a flawed character sprinkled
Hmm.
in because even with like Wyrus and Mags and Beatty, all of those people in future books are kind of like bastions of goodness,
Yeah,
like, and they've been broken, so we're just seeing their origin stories and they're perfectly capable people who are just the most nice, and
hmm.
I don't always need that. But Plutarch was the one that graded against me the least of the fan service. What about you?
I I think that's fair. I think Katniss's dad was the one that bothered me the most, also,
I
where it
think
was
it
just
bothered
like
us both the most for
we
some
were like, just
reason.
stop bringing up Burdock. Don't care. And his daughter, who like used to have two braids and now she has one. Like,
Yeah,
okay, like tired of that.
yeah.
But and yeah, I also didn't like that at the end where he was mentioning like I saw Katniss around and then when she volunteered as tribute, like please no. But I
I think I
agree. I
kind of
just
noped
think
out towards that. I was like, I don't need to listen at 100% right now.
yeah, no, it was too much
Yeah,
there at the end where it's like, no, too getting too sickly sweet. I can't handle it.
yeah.
But I I do agree with you that Plutarch was maybe probably the best fan
Yeah.
service of them all. I guess I didn't think about it from the terms of which is the best fan service because I was just kind of
You're
like,
like,
this is a
there's
lot
so
of fan
much fan.
service.
Yes.
But yeah, I do think you're right that that probably is the best one because it does show a more gray person who's dealing with a
Yes.
more complex situation versus the others where we're very much like, obviously they would hate the Hunger Games. They were forced
I'm
to fight to their death.
I'm obviously on the side of the people who had to murder a whole bunch of people because they had no better option. Like,
Yeah, this
yes,
guy
we're
had his son taken away and like obviously we're on his side. No,
and
you're right.
apparently the Beatty character is going to be like a hottie with a body in the games. Like the person they cast is like incredibly pretty.
Oh my.
Um,
Is it
so
Regé-Jean Page? Like,
no, I forget his name, but like you've got to see him. His name is
oh
Kelvin
no.
Harris Jr.
Oh, is that
Um,
the guy that is in the Mufasa movie?
I think so. It might
Oh,
be.
he is very hot. I know exactly who you're talking about. If that's the
Yeah,
Mufasa movie
yes, he's
guy.
in the Mufasa
Oh,
movie, so he is
he
so
is so
pretty.
hot.
And everyone's like,
Why
I
would they
did
do
not need to,
that?
I know, they're like, I did not need to know that Beatty like could fuck.
Oh my gosh.
Um, so yeah, he
The way that I
is
knew him from Mufasa fame, I'm
right.
so
That's
sorry,
so
sir.
funny.
I'm so sorry. Please do
When
some
you
other
were a
movies that I
lion,
know.
like, when you
You
were
have
a
a great
lion, I
singing
loved
voice.
that. Yeah, he is so pretty. I'm looking at a photo of him
Yeah,
and I'm like, yeah,
he's
distractingly
very
gorgeous.
attractive.
He was in
I didn't
Ender's
have to look
Game
him
and
up. I've
12
already.
Years a Slave. Um, so
Oh,
you've
he's in
probably
12 Years
seen,
a Slave. I've seen that one.
yeah. He was probably a child because that happened a while ago. But yeah, so that's been the big joke. But yeah, I think you're right. It's hard to root against the people who had to murder a bunch
Yeah.
of people for their own self. Um, but yeah, Plutarch is was the most interesting because
Hmm.
like Haymitch questions him a lot,
Right.
and you get to see that people who like opt into this type of thing don't not have dirty hands. Like Plutarch is someone who
Right.
has dirty hands because
It also
he
shows like how
has
he has
to.
to put himself into a lot of dangerous situations as well,
Hmm.
and how it's very like I get that we know in the Hunger Games that he's risking it all or whatever, but I
Right.
think even in the Hunger Games he's still very much in this place of privilege where we're just kind of like, okay, but yeah, you didn't have to grow up in the districts and
Right. Like
possibly die every year, and or just die. You didn't have that
right.
option, where I think this one is a little more iffy in terms of like how we feel about the level of danger that he's putting himself into because he's
Yeah.
so closely connected to Snow within this one,
Yeah.
where Snow
And
feels a little more distant in the Hunger Games trilogy to me.
yes. And Plutarch is someone where like he has this air of like, shouldn't you be happy I gave you breadcrumbs? And I do
Hmm.
think that that's you could say a lot about Haymitch in the future books, but he's always kind of like, I'm just gonna level with you. This is a shitty situation. You don't have to thank me for any of this. Like I'm gonna do what I can,
Hmm.
but like that's it. And he does make them fight for it in a different way. Um, but Plutarch does have an air of like, shouldn't you be happy I'm involved? And it's like, no, we shouldn't. Like, no one has to
Right.
be happy you're here. Being an ally should sometimes be a thankless job.
Hmm.
Like, no one has to thank you for helping them in their own oppression. Um,
Yeah, he does show that privileged stance of like, I'm here, I'm helping, aren't you glad?
yes, again, no one should be thankful in you helping fight their own oppression. So I think
Hmm.
that that's a good rule of thumb for many allies to hear.
Yes,
Like,
for us as
um,
well.
yes, I'm including myself in that. So, um, yeah, and with the end of the book, Hamish kind of like his whole family gets wiped out. So like he comes home and it's like your mother and brother are dead. And
I think
then
we should just mention though briefly, like, uh, I think we kind of touched on it, but just to be more specific, that his entire situation in the games, they manipulated the footage to take out specific parts of the
yes,
games and things that Hamish was doing in order to show them to the viewers. And
yes,
so I was a little iffy on the reception that Hamish was going to get. afterwards where I thought it was going to be a more even more tragic situation where
Oh, where he's
even the
like
people in
ostracized.
yes, that's what I was very worried about. Where I was like, this is very dark. If the people within District 12 even ostracize him deeply over what happens
Yeah,
because of the footage.
it was interesting because I think it's always a question of like what people saw versus what they
Hmm.
forgot. Because like he's quick to like this is a propaganda, so even like
Hmm.
some of the stuff they probably saw on the screen, they just like edited it or changed their mind. So I do wonder if the district knows those things. Like if any of the districts have these people who keep going year after year and it's not the people that they know, I do wonder if they kind of know it's all bullshit and that's more told from the capital stance of things. But I
I think
could
there's
get
a
that
degree of
fear.
that, but I also like I think part of me was a little worried just from the standpoint of like it very much felt like this it always just feels like District 12 is like we're such a rebellion state.
And they're
You
the
know what I
least
mean?
rebellious one out there. They're
Where
always like, we're just trying to go on to get along. Like, it's so funny because you have like District 8 and District 3 who are like, we're going to fight to the death. And then they're like, nope, District 12's fine.
but I just kind of worried, that there was going to be like this like you said, an ostracization of Haymitch, but I also was a little concerned that there would be maybe a belief that what was shown was true
Right.
by the people there, just because there is a lot of mentions in this book specifically of how you can't judge or they wouldn't judge people for how they act during the games because of the situation that it puts you in. And I thought that was a really unique thing that Collins brought up as well, that in extreme situations, people act differently and you
Yes.
cannot know how you're going to act. Like you and I can sit here and say that we won't do X, Y, or Z. If we are pushed to an extreme limit, we're not going to be able to
Right.
always commit to what we say. Like if
Yes.
you're in an extremely fight or flight dangerous situation, you don't know how you're going to react. And I think that that was another thing that I was worried about, that the reception when he got out of the games would be kind of a almost like nonchalant, like just meh reaction
Yeah.
of, yeah, we weren't sure how you would do it. But I was glad that she had the situation she had, even if it was a very tragic ending for him,
Yes.
that there was still a group of people in the community that did still believe in him and support him.
Yes, agreed. And like Lenore Dove dies via poison candy because
Gumdrops.
President Snow is a theater major. Like
Snow lands on top.
right, Snow
I
does
hate
land
that
on
saying
top.
so, man.
Uh,
Oh,
if all the raindrops are lemon drops, or if all the snowflakes are candy bars and milkshakes.
also, Lenore Dove needs to get over gumdrops. Like gumdrops are gross. Like don't
Yeah,
eat those.
they're not. I mean,
Uh,
also, but like they probably don't have, they don't have like candy
I,
bars and things like that. So
you know
like
what? They
you
need to
take what
get
you
some
can.
Hershey Kisses.
Yes, in this dystopian novel, Laura draws
I
the
cannot
line at
believe
Hershey
that
Kisses.
Panem took out Hershey, Pennsylvania. Come on.
They live so close in District 12.
Right.
Um, but
They
so
could have worked at the chocolate factory.
Lenore tells him to prevent another sunrise on the reaping. And then it kind of goes into this very, very specific like epilogue and like, the whole like
Hmm.
my best friend. I can never remember Katniss's dad's name. Um,
Burdock, because they're all named
Burdock.
after plants.
Oh yes, Burdock is just trying to be friends with me and I pushed him away. And I didn't, succeed on another sunrise on the reaping, but I was there to witness it. And I thought this was interesting because in this section, he also talks about pushing friends away from him to keep them safe
Hmm.
because he's worried they may die. And I do think that that's valid with what we hear in the future books where he's like, the capital knows ways of punishing you that you could never imagine, and it's always hinted
Hmm.
at. But I also wouldn't have minded, again, this is a children's book, so I'm an adult, but I wouldn't have minded if it was just alcoholism and drug use that got to him and he was just like, no, I
Sure.
needed oblivion and I needed to stay away from people. And that is also a valid thing to have happened. So I was
Sure.
interested that Suzanne Collins again took kind of the like the people who have done this
Everything's
are
related to the rebellion.
yeah, everything's related to the rebellion, and he just had to keep people safe until he could actively participate. I'm like, yeah, you
It
don't know.
also,
He
like you're saying, would have been very accurate to just have said, no, he's dealt with incredible amounts of trauma and is now horribly depressed
right,
and
like,
cannot do this anymore.
and like that's also friends sometimes can't watch a person in the throes
Hmm.
of their addiction, and that does make that could like help with the Burdock slash
Hmm.
Katniss's mom like leaving him. You know, like there are certain ways
Yep.
you could have done that. I thought it was interesting that she kind of took the like I am a super spy like kind of motivation of like I'm gonna keep people away from me, but I'm always gonna be waiting and watching. And I was like, you know, he went through a lot. He could we could have just had a
He
very
also could have just
depressed.
been a recluse. Like that
Yeah.
would have been fine.
But then it talks about in the end, like him and Katniss and Peeta living in the Victor's village and finding
Yeah.
solace in his little goose eggs. So, I thought that was nice because it kind of
I
ties in the
liked the
end
Katniss,
of
Peeta, and the geese
yes,
thing. That was fine for me.
yes.
Katniss is dead for whatever reason. I'm just gonna die on
That
that hill.
that really annoyed both of us though. Like if it annoyed one of us, fine, but both of us
You
were
and I are
like, that's
Team
a
PETA,
little.
so we're fine with bringing PETA up.
I
But
actually was a Team Gale in high school.
what?
So yeah, I so I
You're
have
Team Gale?
I have a very specific thing of I think sometimes characters are written like they're going to pick a certain person, and in the books it always felt like she was more invested in Gale, so I didn't like when like someone was pushed towards another character too much. Like
So
Twilight,
you felt like she was being pushed towards PETA too much, so then you were like,
yes.
not PETA.
Yeah, I was kind of like, it doesn't seem like she really wants to be with him. So like, why would I vote for someone you don't want to be with? Like, because like Twilight, people who were
Hmm.
Team Jacob always annoyed me because I'm like, she just wants to be with Edward. Why would you ever want her to be like, I figured it out. Now I'm going to go with the like safer bet. I'm like, no, she doesn't want that. Why would you vote for something the character doesn't want? And so for me, it felt like for a long time she wanted Gale, like just with the way the story was told. And then when huge spoilers, but when he murdered her sister through a bomb, I kind of felt like it was almost like I was frustrated because I understand it now through the themes of like he is a warmonger. He was like very much like war is the answer. Da, 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 da. But
Hmm.
like to me, it felt like at the time, Suzanne Collins was just trying to make up an excuse for why she picked PETA. And even at the end, she's
Mm.
like, yeah, and one day he just showed up, so I guess we're together now. And I was like, she's still not making an active choice on who she wants to be with, so this is so stupid. And so that bugged me that Katniss was never an active participant in her own life. Like that annoyed me. Now as an adult, I see why.
I was gonna say, I feel like I feel like reading the trilogy originally, maybe in the first book was like, I guess Gale is a good option. Don't go for PETA, but uh, I quickly got over that at the end of, or maybe towards the middle, even when we learned that PETA has an interest in Katniss. And I
Uh,
think the trauma bond of it all probably got me. But
yeah. Yeah, I always thought that Katniss never made an active choice, and I wish she could have instead of him just showing up one day and her being like, I guess you're here now. I guess,
he was
like it
very
just
much a
felt,
support for her, though,
yes.
which is again the trauma bond of it all, where I do think that she was always very much like the strength for other people, and he was able to provide some support for her that she wasn't able to get from anywhere else. And I think that is something to definitely, admire in a partner.
In my adulthood, I'm much more on the side of they should be together because as an adult reading this, Suzanne Collins does a very effective job of rating someone who never thought love was an option.
Yes.
And so probably does not know how to communicate that they were in love with someone. And
Hmm.
as an adult rereading these, I read that in Katniss and Peeta. In my stunted high school youth who just wanted romance, I was like, oh, these two are not meant to be together because there's not a ton of romance. There's a ton of like
No.
appreciation and deep love that Katniss cannot communicate. And so I
Hmm.
think that's what
And I
I
think
was
it's
missing in the
similar to what you
books.
and I have talked about before in other series or movies or things that we've covered, where it's like well, there's no romance. And it's like, yeah, but these are really extreme times that we're talking about. There
Yes.
can't be lots of romance.
Right. I think I was missing the forest for the trees as an
Yeah,
18
yeah,
year
yeah.
old who was
Yeah,
like, Ale
I'm not
seems
denying
hot.
you. I'm not denying you that you're
Like,
that's very valid to have that take as well.
yeah. As an adult, I see their romance as like a much deeper level
Right, right, right.
affection. And like someone I was recently on TikTok and someone talked about like, because a lot of people had an issue with Katniss having kids at the end. And they're like,
Hmm.
no, in the book, she never says she doesn't want kids. She said that kids are impossible in the world she lives in.
Yes.
And she has never even considered that as an option. And so once
Hmm.
all the trauma leaves, yes, she can now consider it. And yes, she made an active choice. And I think me in my younger years also disliked the kid's choice. And me as an adult was like, no, that person has the correct take.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
guys, we can have different opinions than when we were 18. So
Right?
guess what? I'm 34 now, and I am technically Team Peta because I think that's who she wanted to be with. And fundamentally, I always want the person to end up with who they wanted to end up with.
Yeah.
Like, um, but yeah, I was technically Team Gale growing up, and I was devastated when he blew up Prim. So
Who wasn't?
right, I get that's fair. So yeah, any final thoughts on Sunrise on the Reaping or any of the tales of Suzanne Collins?
I'll just say that of the original Hunger Games trilogy, Catching Fire was my favorite, and I think Sunrise on the Reaping was my favorite of the two prequels.
I don't know which one was my favorite. I feel like these are books I appreciate more and more on reread, which is very different for me. I'm not a huge
Hmm.
rereader. Um, but I do think Catching Fire was amazing in this like reread. I really want you to read the Tatiana Maslany ones because she
Hmm.
hits it out of the park. She does such a good job. So everyone go listen to those versions because I'm obsessed. I think I have a crush on Tatiana Maslany though. So also caveat with Hannah has a huge crush on her. So but I do think you're I think I might like Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes only because of the interest I have in taking a villain story and the
Sure.
way Suzanne Collins writes it. 'Cause she's so
Hmm.
effective at it. And so I think I appreciated that more versus like Sunrise on the Reaping felt a little too fan servicey for me. And like the message didn't get across until like a while
Sure.
later for me. But still
Yeah, I think they
amazing.
both are effective in what they do, and I give them the same amount of stars, so
Oh,
it's
good.
in my review, so it's not like I don't think either of them are good. I
Yeah.
I think they're both really great, and Suzanne Collins is just a masterful writer. Like
Yeah.
excellent, excellent, excellent themes.
Yes. I think it's so good. Everyone go read Suzanne Collins' works because she
Yes.
really is doing the work. She does seem to have like a lot more to say. I hope none of
She
them
really
get
has her finger on the pulse here, where she's like got it all figured out.
yes, agreed. Well, with that, thank you for joining us on this journey to talk about Sunrise on the
Yes.
Reaping and the works of Suzanne Collins. Next week, please join us for our beginning of Indie Mission as we cover Javi Novet's They Came in the Night. This one is a chunker, so make sure you're reading it now because we will be covering the first third of the book, or no, the first half of the book.
Hmm.
Um, so buckle down, get half of it read, and join us next week to discuss our indie mission pick. And keep an eye out because we will be talking to Javi at the end of the month. So that is
Yay.
exciting. And Laura, thank you so much for going on this journey with me
Oh, it
into
was a lot of fun.
some books that I pushed you to read. So
And come talk to us about it on Discord. Please, people, join our
yes.
Discord. Like Hannah and I would be thrilled to just chat about Hunger Games
Oh my
nonstop.
gosh. Honestly, I freaking love talking about this. So if someone
Tell us
wants to
about your
read
favorite
through them
characters, your
and
favorite movies. Let's do a watch party of
let,
Catching Fire. Like,
let's
let's.
do a watch party of all of them because Hannah hasn't
Oh,
seen the
yeah, that's
last
right. You
two. So
didn't
like we
see
could
some of the
just
movies.
physically watch
So,
all of them. So please do that. Join us on Discord or follow us at OWWR Pod on all the platforms we are on, including Instagram and Blue Sky. Please check
yes.
out our reading list and what's coming next at ourpod.com. We have some great things coming down the line. So make sure you're checking that out. And, just rate, review, and subscribe or tell a
Yeah,
friend to come
it
listen.
really
We want
helps.
to have everyone join in on our conversations as we do deep dives into many books talking about some wonderful things like the things we did here today. So
And thanks for listening today.
we will see you next week for our indie mission. Bye.
Bye.